All right, so how can we optimize our lives and homesteads with awareness of function stacking opportunities? By the way, I'm Nick Ferguson, and I'm a permaculture consultant, and this is the kind of work that I do all across the nation and internationally. Here's one of the designs I've done in the past couple of years. And we have some swales on contour with fruit and nut producing shade, flowering trees, everything that the client wanted in here. And we've actually stacked some functions in here just specifically for what he wanted. He wanted it low maintenance, and he wanted a place to drive a four-wheeler back and forth through this, what was a field. And so we installed some swales, and in the berm we planted pecans and hickories and chestnuts, white oak, some Crimson King maples just for some fall color and show, apples, peaches, pears, apricots, nectarines, you name it as far as fruit goes. We put that all in there. So that's just kind of an idea. Yeah.
So what was that?
Sorry?
I didn't hear you. I don't.
Okay, function stacking. Hold on, let me go back. So this is a design that I did for one of my clients. Thanks. He wanted to turn this pasture into a food forest, and one of his specific requirements is that he wanted a place where his kids could drive four-wheelers just back and forth through some trails. And he wanted some extra shade in there. And his wife wanted something that looked pretty. So we put things like Crimson King maples that put on a beautiful show in the fall. We put dogwoods and redbuds. He wanted some big shade trees, so you can see these larger trees. These are sized out at the eventual canopy size, so he could see a representation of what this would look like 15, 20 years down the road. And we plugged in apples and peaches and pears, plums, you name it, everything that he wanted to put in here. I placed it in accordance to where it would gild best with its neighbors, both in size and function. And we stacked everything from earliest harvest, closest to this pathway, this dark line is his path, to latest harvest. So as he's just driving out there on his four-wheeler or his golf cart, he can see the things that are ripening earliest. And as he drives through, he can pick some stuff and then monitor the things that will be ripening a month or two down the road. That's just a little example.
What software did you do that design on?
That's on Adobe Illustrator. So you might wonder, what is function stacking? Well, every component in a system has the following attributes. It has inputs, outputs, and its intrinsic nature. So we look at a thing like a tree. It needs certain things. Those are the inputs. And it gives off certain things. Nuts, leaves that drop in the fall. There are branches that are harvested from it when we prune, or that fall off of it as it grows. And then its intrinsic nature. Well, a tree is a tree, and it is intrinsically a tree. That's the thing. A pig is going to be an animal. All animals have certain similar needs and characteristics. So we look at those three things to determine what its needs are, what its outputs are, so that we can fit it into the system intelligently. And it's going to become more clear as we go. So what is a component? It's a rabbit, a chicken, earthworms, an earthworm bin, a greenhouse, a garden, cattle, your barn or your house. Does any of this matter? Yes, a bear does. There's proof. Why should I care? Well, we have limited space, time, energy, and resources. And it makes the most sense to strategically utilize our resource base because that allows us to do more with fewer things. And when we stack functions into a system, it builds resiliency, and it also enables a higher return with lower energy inputs. So we get a bigger bang for our buck. We don't have to put in as much, and we get more out of it than someone who isn't stacking these functions in their environment. So again, we assess the inputs, the outputs, and intrinsic nature of the components. The needs, the products, the waste, the behavior, and we look for beneficial relationships between those components. And we join the elements in mutually beneficial arrangements. So we know that chickens, for instance, need shade in the afternoon. And so if we take into account where the sun is going to be traveling on our property, and we know that we want a pecan tree or a mulberry, for instance. We know we want a mulberry. And so we have this big array of locations. Well, where should we put a mulberry tree? Well, where can we put a mulberry tree that any fruit drop doesn't become a problem for us? So we wouldn't want to put a mulberry tree right next to our front door, because the fruit's going to fall down, you're going to get it stuck in the treads of your shoes, you're going to walk in on your carpet, and you're going to have purple splotches all through your carpet. Well, what if we put the mulberry tree right next to your chicken pen on the south side or the western edge? And then any fruit drop that would be a waste thing that just rots, well, now it's chicken food, and mulberries are 1 to 2% protein. It's pretty good chicken food. So we're aiming for an integrated system. Everything is benefiting the thing next to it in some way, and the waste products are being utilized in as efficient of a manner as possible to the benefit of the other systems. So in here we've got our house, and sorry about the quality of this. We take our manure from our livestock and it goes to our tree systems and our garden, and then the food goes back to us. Any of the food waste from our kitchen, we can feed it to birds and fish, to our other animals, and we have this cycling of nutrients and resources. So when we assess something like a chicken, well, what are its needs? It needs shelter, grit, dust, water, air. It needs food. It needs other chickens. It gives us off all these things. And you might think, well, it gives off CO2. What's the big deal with that? Why would I need to know that? It scratches. It flies. It fights. Each one of these things can be harnessed in some way or another. And its intrinsic characteristics, well, it's a bird. Specific breeds have specific characteristics. A light-colored bird is going to be able to be out in the sun a little bit more than a dark-colored bird because it's not going to get as hot. It's climate tolerance. You can have birds that are adapted to really hot climates. So we think about all this stuff when we're designing our homesteads, our farms, so that we can build resiliency into it, so that we put less into it, so that we can get more out of it. So who wants to turn this by hand? Anyone? Nobody? Would you like this much compost to work with? Yeah. What if we make the chickens work our compost pile? I'm sure everyone has seen Jeff Lawton's chicken tractor on steroids. If you haven't, check it out. It's really cool. So they have a covered compost area where they take all their kitchen scraps and they pile it up in there, and the chickens eat it. And they add trimmings and clippings and old hay and components like that that you would put in a compost pile. And then they move the whole system down the space of a compost pile. And this is what it looks like after the chickens have worked it for a week or so. And then they scratch this down. You can see these chickens scratching. chicken scratch. Where does stuff fall? Down. So it goes downhill. They'll scratch it downhill, they eat through it, they pick through it, and they get a lot of their nutrition from that compost pile. It cuts down on our feed requirements, right? That's good for my pocketbook. And if I don't have to tear that compost pile down, all I have to do is pile it up in a little bit different spot. They've cut my workload in half. My time involved in turning compost piles has been reduced 50%. That is pretty dang cool. And then if I can reduce their feed costs by 50%, that's a huge win. Got some more chickens, working a compost pile. Well, what about stacking some animals? So these are some of my rabbits. Those are some Joel Salatin stock right there. There's a rooster under there.
Guard rabbits?
Yeah, the guard rabbits. They're crazy. So my chickens have access to underneath of the rabbit hutches. And they scratch the manure and it doesn't mat. And they pick through it and they eat the waste food and some of the rabbit pellets. So they're further reducing their feed requirements and they're reducing my need to clean up underneath the rabbits because they keep it all light and aerated. And then all I do is scrape that out, add it to the compost pile, which is right next to it, and it makes my job a lot easier. See, he's getting food right there. So we're talking about the CO2. Chickens breathe, okay? They also give off body heat. Well, what if we stack them in a hoop house or a greenhouse? We bring them in to a contained structure and they come in during the winter and they give off body heat. That's going to benefit our plants. That reduces my energy input into that greenhouse. I don't have to heat it nearly as much. What about the CO2? Plants respire CO2 for their metabolism. You know, some greenhouses, they actually have CO2 emitters. You can buy $1,000 machines, $3,000 machines in these big greenhouses to increase CO2 levels so that your plants will grow better. Well, how about we just bring in some CO2 machines and we meet their needs for winter protection from the cold, and we meet our needs for extra CO2 for our plants. We could split a greenhouse right down the center, like that top right. And we put our plants, our tomatoes, our green beans, cucumbers, whatever, on the right. And we put our poultry on the other side. And we grow some plants in there for them to scratch through and pick at. And then what if you have a tomato that you just didn't catch and it gets a rotten spot on it? You pick it. You don't have to carry it to your garbage or your compost pile. You just turn and toss it. And now the chickens are getting good food. And you just cut down on the amount of time that you have to work on this. So what about some poor function stacking ideas? This is not a good function stacking idea right there. There's a deer on a bed.
Make it wrinkle.
Yeah, we're going to wrinkle the sheets.
It'd be better if it was in the kitchen.
Everything has products, right? So what are some deer products? We've got venison, of course. So we've got manure. We don't want that. And this is just something cool I saw. Goats on a tree. It's kind of function stacking. All right, let's talk about building a pond. So we can line a pond in this EPDM rubber, and it's a lot of work. It's expensive, but we can hold water in places where we couldn't hold water otherwise. But how about a bigger pond? Man, there's the excavator right there. That's a lot of water. Imagine how expensive that is. to line that thing in rubber. How long is that rubber going to last? It's not a natural system.
Does it leach?
Hmm?
Would it leach?
It would leach out some chemicals. What about a really big pond? Those are people. That is a piece of the rubber that they're going to weld together to make one big contiguous piece. Well, can we think of a better way to seal our ponds? What seals ponds? Does anyone have?
Duck poo.
Ducks?
Pigs.
Pigs? Okay.
Clay.
Pigs. So let's take our pigs, and we need to seal a pond, right? That's an expense. So if we have pigs, and it's appropriate for our climate and the situation, well, we bring pigs in. Where do pigs like to go? To mud, right? That you don't see them swimming out in the middle of a 20-acre lake. They like to roll in the mud. Well, where's the mud? The mud is right at the water's edge. This frame right here. None of them are on the center. They want to lay there with their snouts out of the mud so they can breathe, right? Because they need to breathe. That's one of their needs. So if we have a pond that's filling up with water a little bit, and then it stops, we've got water going into it, but it's just disappearing because it's leaking out. Where's it leaking out? The edge, that water line. Where do the pigs go?
Hey, buddy, chill.
The pigs go to the edge, where the water leak is. And I don't know if any of y'all have ever been out hunting in the woods, exploring, and see a pig wallow in the middle of nowhere. There's no water going to it. It's been dry for weeks, months maybe, and there's water in the bottom of the pig wallow. They seal soil so well. It's incredible that they'll have standing water where they wallow. So we get, depends on how many pigs. Depends on how big your pond is.
These things he's telling you here work where it sort of, kind of will seal, but won't quite do it, so this pushes it over the top.
Right.
You try to do that here in this rock.
No. So again, appropriate systems. If you have gravel, sealing ponds with pigs, not going to happen. But if you don't have quite enough clay in your soil, and you've got nice deep soils, and you can hold a little bit of water, but it drains away kind of quick, put some pigs in there, they'll start mucking up the bottom of it, and then it fills up with the next rain event. And then they roll around on the edges, and then it fills up again, and they work the edges, and it fills up, and they work the edges, and you keep doing that until it's all the way full. And then what do we have at the end of all that work?
Bacon.
We have bacon. We got ham. And all this time, we have met the needs of the pigs. They need to stay cool. So they love to roll in mud. So we're making happy pigs. We're making healthy pigs. We're sealing our pond. And we're getting it sealed for free with no work. We put up fence and we feed them. And we have no more work involved in sealing our pond. Anything else that you think might love mud or be able to seal a pond?
Channel cat.
Hmm?
Channel cat.
Channel cats? How about hippies? They pay to do this. They will pay you to come seal your pond. Now,
But there's no byproduct.
yeah, well, there's not much in the way of inputs. Maybe beer, and you have output of empty beer bottles.
Great picture.
But yeah, be careful about searching Google image search for hippies in the mud. I did not pull up any of the naked pictures because what has been seen cannot be unseen. It's pretty bad. So the contrast on this is really bad, so you can't see some of the details of these photos.
Maybe if we shut them.
Maybe. Well, we've got some solar lights here. These ones top right, they float in water. I don't have any Monty Python jokes for that.
Does that seal the pond?
No. We're talking about a different function here. So at night, we have low input, low energy cost to get some light out there. Bugs, nighttime bugs, flock to light. And you can see some of these spotlights. They're just swarmed in insects. But what would you do with a couple 100 pounds of insects a year?
Feed fish.
Feed them to livestock.
That is free food for birds, fish. I can take those bugs and turn them into these. Free eggs. What about some other insect harvest needs? Let's say we live somewhere where mosquitoes are really bad. Well, we can pay to have someone spray toxic chemicals. Or we can stack a function. We can put a net on the front side of a fan that's blowing at us on our porch, and mosquitoes get sucked into it on the backside and caught by the net. So we've harvested the adult mosquitoes and prevented them from biting us. And we also have a resource that we can feed our birds. Wonderful function stacking. We don't get bit by mosquitoes, and we get to feed them to our animals and reduce our feed costs. And this is a plant. Does anyone know what this plant is? Anyone know what it looks like? Looks like a hosta. So any of you guys that are married and you want permaculture stuff around your house, ladies love hostas because they're pretty, right? And they bring an aesthetic value to our property. And that's sometimes a function that we need to put in there. This is comfrey. This is a variegated comfrey. And it grows better than hostas. It grows in more light levels than hostas. And we have a medicinal yield. We have a high protein leaf that we can feed our animals. And if nothing else, it's just something attractive. So what about some gardening? Let's look at this garden. So what are some needs we have in a garden? We need to reduce competition, conserve water. So they're conserving water with some black plastic mulch. They've got their rows going downhill, so if it ever rains, a lot of the water's just running down and taking soil with it. But they know that they need to reduce weed pressure, and they know they need to conserve moisture. That's why they put this black plastic mulch down. Well, it's a different way that we can do that, and we can stack some functions into our garden. What if we use some straw bales? So we have multiple functions here. The straw bale is a physical barrier in between the grass and our garden. There's one. The straw bale is acting as a windbreak, helping to protect these young plants. There's two. Well, we need some mulch for our paths. So we can go and buy that extra and bring it in. Or at the end of the growing season, we take this and we break them down and we use them to mulch our paths and our beds, and we replace them. There's a third one.
Can you also grow
Or we could
stuff
just
inside
spend
the
money
hay
on it.
bales?
What's that?
You can grow stuff inside the hay bales as well.
Yeah, you could. They have to be broken down pretty good before you can do that, but you can. You can grow stuff right inside them, and after they're harvested, you break it apart and add it to your beds. Or we could just spend money on a special machine that lays that mulch down, that plastic mulch, and we can bake our soil You know what happens when you put black plastic down on top of soil? It gets nice and warm. You can get it 180 degrees in there. Not much bacteria lives in 180 degrees in soil. So we can bake our soil and kill it. Or we can keep it cool and healthy and full of life and stack functions, save money, save time, save effort. Which one of those would you prefer? I've got that one on the right. What about honey locust? Plant with thorns on top of thorns. Some of those thorns, that's my hand right there. Thorns this long. Why would we want to grow that on our property?
Barrier.
A barrier? Security. Okay? What kind of bad guys want to crawl through a thicket of that? If you put that on your property line.
Rare fox.
So, honey locust gives us pods that are good for food, for animals. It's a nitrogen fixer. If we put that on a it's hardy. We could put that on a property line uphill, and the nitrogen that it fixes, it washes downhill into our whole system. And we can put that on a barrier property where we have unwelcome intrusions from a neighbor or whoever, animals.
How big does that honey locust get? How tall?
They can get 30, 40,
Can they-
50 feet tall. So here's an upside down chicken tractor. And I built my chicken tractor specifically to serve multiple purposes. I wanted to stack as many functions into the structure as I could because I don't like building one-off use structures. So I've got my chicken tractor. It's flipped upside down. It's got some bedding in there. And I use that for a kid pen. So when the baby goats are small, if I let them out with their parents, they'll go out and they'll be 1,000 feet away out in the woods, and they'll bed down in this little crook. And where I live, I'll get freak storms that come up and dump inches of rain on us out of nowhere. And they might be bedded down sleeping, and I've lost baby goats that way. A couple days later, can't find them, look all over the place, cold, dead kids. So I keep them in here, and the does hop over it, they nurse the babies, and then they hop back out and they go browse. And then once they're big enough that they can hop out, I flip the tractor over, I use the bedding that they've dropped manure in as compost materials, and it goes back to being a chicken tractor. So I've stacked another function right there. So let's go back to bugs. Does anyone know what this is? It's kind of hard to see. That's a black soldier fly. Yeah, I heard somebody. These are black soldier flies in a bin harvesting themselves into a bucket. You build the bin, you put some larvae in there, you put some food scraps in there, and once they are mature enough to turn into adults, they have no mouth parts, they don't eat, they don't defecate, and they crawl away from their food source, and they crawl up this incline, and they get funneled into this pipe, and they drop into a 5-gallon bucket, and then all you do is once a day you go out there, take your bucket out, put in a new bucket, and take that to your chickens, and they're 30% protein and fat. They are super rich food source, and it's garbage that they turn into a top-notch bird food. And so what if you have a ton of these in the summertime? Well, we put some of them in a gallon Ziploc freezer bag and freeze it, and then in the winter we have high protein food for our birds to keep them laying longer into the winter.
Where do you get the larvae from?
They will just show up. If you're too far north, they don't go very far north, but down here, if you're anywhere from the middle of the country south, you should have black soldier fly larvae. They have them up in West Virginia. So they just show up when there's something that needs to be broken down.
Meat.
Yep, meat. If you're a brewer, spent grains from brewing, they love that.
Really?
And what's really cool about them is they give off an exudate that is a fly repellent. So you don't have house flies laying eggs in that black soldier fly bin. It is dominated by the black soldier flies. And they are such voracious eaters that the bin does not smell like rotting food. It doesn't smell pleasant, but it's not like a big pile of corpses.
It's funny. I dump grains on my compost pile, and I guess those are flies that I've seen out there.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know that's what they were?
Yep. And they give off a ton of heat. So if you take our earlier chicken in the chickens in the greenhouse example, and you put your black soldier fly bin inside the greenhouse for the winter, as long as you can keep that greenhouse 70 degrees or warmer, you can keep black soldier flies going year round. And they give off a ton of heat just from their metabolic activity. So this is Elijah's Spring Farm in West Virginia, and everything you see here was my design. We have some contour-based beds here right next to the structure. This is our Zone 1 proceeding into Zone 2 down here, and this is still Zone 1 right here. Because every day someone is coming past this area right here through that gate, and the compost used to be made down here. Now there's one advantage to making it down there, and that was shade. But people had to walk down there, and anything leaving that compost pile was going straight down the hill and into a creek and leaving the property. And so I moved it up here and created a shelf right here. People were spending, Jack, how many hours were people spending turning compost?
4 to 5 hours a freaking day.
4 to 5 hours
I came unglued. I was pissed.
a day turning compost.
4 or 5 man hours.
Okay, yeah, you were there. You
I
turned compost.
did them. Yeah, it was 4 or 5 of us on a bunch of piles, and it would take us about an hour.
Okay,
Yeah,
4 or 5 man hours
yeah.
to turn compost.
Yep.
Except there was a tractor on
When
site.
it was done, you had to pull it uphill.
Yeah, okay, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
So there's a tractor on site with a front end loader. So, yeah. So I fixed the problem. We moved the compost piles up here onto a shelf, and the tractor could come up here and scoop it. The tractor did this and dumped. Backed up, scooped, dumped, backed up, scooped. One person was done with all compost turning in about 10 minutes, tops. So let's think about this. Everyone eats here, processes food here, garbage is created, waste, food scraps, and then the people come this direction to take care of animals and drive right past this. They go out into the greater landscape where there are other materials. So in one trip, they can load up their food scraps, drive past here. They don't even have to stop. Someone could have paper bags with food scraps in it, and you just toss it out, or a bucket. Dump as we're driving. We don't even have to stop. Compost materials are dropped off. You continue on your way, go do your business out there. Maybe you collect some leaves and limbs and some rotten wood. On your way back, you stop and you unload that into the compost pile area. What happens? Oh, of course. Can't even see that picture. What happens when it rains and some of the leachate from the compost piles runs away? Where's it going to go? Downhill, right into a swale, where our most important fruit trees were planted. So the most important ones are planted right there. We're driving past them multiple times a day so we can see if there's ever any problems with them. We take our compost tea, which is what it is. Every time it rains, that compost tea is running right across that hard surface of the roadway. Roadways don't absorb very much water because they're compacted. So we're getting almost all of that in our swale, feeding our trees, and then anything that leaves that swale goes down into the Zone 2 main food production raised beds on contour. And they go down, and they fill that one, and then they go down to the next one, and they snake it. And we snake that over probably about 2,000 linear feet instead of 2 feet. That is good function stacking.
What are those orange orbs?
Oh, those orange spots are where we planted mulberries. Mulberries have a growth habit where they like to canopy out like an umbrella. And we have chickens. The plan was to have chickens right uphill. You can't see it because the next frame is too washed out, too dark. But we put mulberries here, and we put a fence right here, and then we can keep the chickens contained in that area to work those compost piles for us, having our energy inputs into it. And we get to feed the chickens. Any mulberries that drop, feed the chickens. They are shading the compost piles, feeding the chickens, and we get to cut limbs, pollard these trees, as food for our animals, which is right there. And we plant comfrey underneath it. Chickens love the comfrey. If we have excess comfrey, we cut the comfrey, and we go 500 feet to our compost pile. No, we cut the comfrey and dump it downhill. And then where does our compost go when we need to use it? Into a wheelbarrow or a cart, and it goes downhill. So you don't have to push a cart uphill. You just let it roll downhill and control it. And then we get our compost where we want it with very little energy, very little inputs. So how do we stack the functions of components? We assess the inputs, outputs, and intrinsic natures of the components. We learn about the needs, products, waste, behavior, and we look for beneficial relationships between the components and other sets of elements. And we join those elements in mutually beneficial arrangements. That's it.
Nice.
Questions?
I got a question.
Okay.
Chicken in the greenhouse.
Mm-hmm.
Do you do that for winters? And you just leave that in there around the clock?
Sure. You can have something like a dog door that you can train them to open and head out. And they'll go out into a run or a yard or into your landscape if you're just free-ranging them. Most people, they'll open up their greenhouses during the summer for lots of ventilation and put shade cloth on them. So you still end up with, it's shelter for the chickens, it's cooler, shadier, so you can still use that same structure all year round. You just moderate how they come and go between summer and winter.
So the dog door really works, huh?
Sir?
The dog door really works,
Yep.
huh?
Mm-hmm. You could have just a dog door sized opening with a couple of flaps of flexible plastic, and if you train, if a couple of them see, if you can get a couple of them to go through it, then the others will see and they'll go through. Other questions?
You said chickens like black soldier flies. Ducks like them too?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
all birds like them. You have to keep the tops covered or else you'll be visited by songbirds. Mockingbirds love them. Anyone else?
Yeah. How about ducks breaking down the compost pile?
Okay, good question. So, ducks. Let's take into account what some of their behaviors are. Ducks versus chickens. Chickens scratch, ducks don't. So, the chickens scratch the material down and move it away from its high point, but ducks don't. So, ducks would not be a good match for working a compost pile because they're not going to scratch it.
Ducks make mud.
Yeah, ducks make mud.
Compact things. They don't.
And we don't want compaction with compost piles. We want air in it. So ducks work really good with sealing up ponds. In fact, that's what I'm going to be doing on my property. We're putting ducks in the duck ponds, which are going to be small ponds. We might have 2 that are about the size of jacks and a third one that's going to be a little smaller. And they're going to be put in there, and when we get rain this winter, they'll compact it and they'll seal the bottom of that pond, and as we get rain events, it'll fill up just like what happened with pigs.
Would you first dig it out as deep as you want it?
Yes.
And then
It will be dug out and excavated. And we'll try and get water in it as soon as possible with irrigation from the reservoir that I live on. But we'll be heading into the rainy season. So we should be getting,
You have to think, right, when you do ponds with ducks and you're going to seal it with a duck, well, you can't make a bowl.
right.
You got to make like that. You got to have slope.
Yeah. It has to be gentle slopes or else they won't be able to work the edges that are steep. And you want their webbed feet. If you go out to any of these swale bottoms where they walk along, we might be able to find some spots where,
It's floated and it's mashed.
yeah,
It's a bit dry right now, but anywhere I've dumped recently like that mid-swell, you'll see exactly what he's talking about.
yeah. It's like working with drywall and floating mud. You smooth it, or laying down concrete. You take that and you smooth it back and forth, back and forth. That's what pigs do, and that's what ducks do. And it seals it, and it makes it nice and smooth. And you get those smooth particulates rising to the top, and that's what seals it against water penetration. Yeah. Another one?
Do you recommend anything else to seal a pond if you want a bigger pond besides?
There's always bentonite clay. Most of the time, if you have a large pond site and you don't want to put animals in it, then you're going to have to make sure you have good clay content in the soil, or you have to import clay. If you're in Texas, bentonite clay is probably your cheapest, most reliable method.
Do fish
And
do
it's
it?
borderline, right? Like if
What
the
species of
problem
fish
is
would-
you
Fish
have,
will, but the problem with fish is that they're only going to deposit any organic material at the bottom. So you have to be able to get it full. You'd have to have a lot of fish and artificially fill it, or have a rain event, and even then you're only going to capture a little bit of that, and it's just going to drop
you
down.
could use glee, and the way you could do that,
Yeah, I was
get
about
a
to.
whole bunch of manure, cow manure cheap,
Mhm.
line the bottom with just manure. It can even be halfway compost. It doesn't matter. Roll it out. Seed it with buckwheat. And the buckwheat will jump up to about that high in about 6 weeks. And then you want to roll your buckwheat. You don't want to mow it. You don't want to cut it. You just want to roll it over flat. And then bring another lower load of manure on top of that. And when you get that buckwheat sealed between those 2 layers of manure, it will turn to like a gooey, nasty gel. And it'll seal.
It will anaerobically digest,
Yeah.
and it will be a slime layer, and that will seal a pond
Charles, come here.
not that
very
it's
reliably.
Well,
Yeah,
it won't matter.
You'd want to give it some
Long term.
time because that's a lot of manure.
That's a lot of manure, but long term, it'll.
It will clean up.
Beneficial bacteria will get in there.
Yes.
And it'll equalize.
This is kind of a, I don't know, bigger picture question, I think. Do you ever find yourself getting into function stacking, or problem is the solution kind of death spirals, where it's just like, well, then I could just add this, and then now you've got something else going on, and it's got its own problems, and you're trying to figure out a way multi-stacks functions of another element, and then you bring more stuff in, and then you just kind of get out of control. Where do you stop? Where do you...
If you get away from looking at the big picture and what your big picture goals are, you can start adding in too many energy intensive details if you don't have the bones of the system ready to go first. That's like, I've done this myself. You go and you get animals, you bring them home and you put them in a temporary shelter because now I have to build something for them. And it's way better to have that ready to go, the house built, before you put anything in it. You buy your furniture after your house is finished.
Yeah.
You buy your animals after their fence is up and their structure is complete. And same thing with adding functions and adding components that are more intensive. You wait until you have the means to accept that into the system as a whole.
Have places prepared before you spend lots of money on trees. Ask me now. Irrigation in, whether you think you need to or not. If you can afford
You
to, and
didn't
it
come
makes
out
sense.
too clear. Can you say that?
Another question?
Do you wait for the problem to show itself? I mean, you can anticipate some problems in function stack or double solve a problem.
Mm-hmm.
But do you, in a big system like we're talking, say at Permeathos, do you wait till the problem shows itself and then try to fix it in a way that's compatible with also doing something else? Or do you, we obviously didn't pre-plan everything at the start. How much?
I always like to replace my tires before I have a blowout. And with everything, I like to anticipate the problem before it presents itself, because it is always 10 times cheaper to prevent a problem than fix a problem. And it's way less energy input. So
Yeah, but you still carry a spare and a jack.
that's right.
Don't you?
That's right. So I always try to prevent the problems rather than react to them. Yeah. Another question?
What's your function stacking record?
My function stacking rec, I have no clue.
You don't like money, do you?
Apparently I don't like money. Anyone else? All right. Well, cool. Thanks, guys.
Good job, man.
Thanks.
Good job.
Hey Nick, is that PowerPoint gonna be available?
Sure, I can make it available.
Hey, Nick,
$1
don't you-
million. We're about to do the property walk, and I'm going to talk about the duck business, but I'm going to tell you, nobody's going to be surprised by anything in the duck business. This property walk is going to talk about a lot of the mistakes we made and how we're going to change what we're doing here to compensate for those. But
How much do you compromise though when you start figuring that in?
you compromise as much as you have to get what you need done. I mean, that's what it comes down to. If you're gonna make a living or even just make a small income like we do on our ducks on a farm, then there's certain things that you got to do to produce enough product to be able to sell it. So you figure out how to make that work first. So that would be another thing I would have done. I love the ducks. The ducks are the best thing that ever happened to us. So if I could just rewind 3 years and have all the knowledge I do now, the first year that field would have had something done to it, all right. I would have threw irrigation over there and I would have planted 400 or 500 black locust trees that cost me 80 cents a piece. And if half of them died, I wouldn't have cared at all. I promise you. Right? And I would have worked on this, and I would have put the ducks here right away, and I would have put the paddocks in right away. So a lot of them we got right. But the ducks getting here is a small little fun thing to do with our chickens, and then realizing we love the ducks so much more than the chickens, right? And then realizing we had a much better market for the duck product than the chicken product. Well, then we got rid of the chickens, and then we started building the system around the ducks. So as great as it is to sit here and look forward and say, I'm going to plan all this stuff out, sometimes you fall into what's going to work for you. And then you function stack around the elements that are actually your profit center. So our profit centers are ducks. So now we got good at ducks, really good. We built a market. We have cash flow. The ducks pay for themselves and then make us money. Now we're bringing in quail. When I first got here, if I had had that success with ducks that fast, it would have been quail and pigs. So what I've learned is some patience and to get something really, really working for you. Something that makes sense, like John did with microgreens and duck eggs and quail eggs. So he's got that core. And most of his income is from microgreens. And he's now building everything else he does around that core. we're building everything we do around the ducks now. And that leads you to the function stacking and the plan and the design and the implementation for the system that you want to have. But 3 years ago, there's no way I could have done that because I didn't know we were going to have ducks. You know, my wife said, let's get some ducks. I said, okay, we'll get some ducks. Then she said, let's get some more ducks. I like them. I said, how many? She goes, 22. Like just being a woman. And you're coming up here because you're going to talk a little bit.
About what? I got things
Now
to
you
do.
get only 5 minutes. I just want you to tell them something here in a second. So anyway, she says to me later, did you order more ducks? I said, yeah. She goes, how many? I said, 22. And she was like, well, okay. So we got those ducks. And then that led us to all the rest of this stuff. Well, here's what I want you to tell them, honey, because I'm about to take them for a walk and talk about the duck business. I want you to tell them what you say when you call a customer back about duck eggs. Somebody calls and says, I want to know how to get eggs.
No, I just say this is Dorothy with duck eggs.
This is Dorothy with the duck
With the
eggs.
duck egg.
Not Dorothy with 9 Mile Farm, right? Dorothy with the duck eggs. And she's, took 20, 30 years of being a nurse and doing phone triage and being, happy about things that are maybe not the happiest thing. Very cheerful on the phone, and it's completely disarming. Like, people just love that kind of personal connection. Now, do you plan for that, or did you think about that, or did you sit down, I'm gonna say that? No, it just was natural, right? So you found that. But she's a damn good saleswoman. She'll sell the hell out of those duck eggs. And whenever we do get a surplus for a minute, she'll be on the phone, and in like 5 minutes, they're gone. She'll make a call to all her regular customers, and she has everything cleaned out. This is Dorothy with the duck eggs. Now, that's an example. You can't plan that. That just has to happen. You just have to find what works for you.
She likes money.
She likes money. She does. She got like one order, $220 check this week. She's doing a happy dance with it. And it works. But anyway, I'm gonna walk the property with you guys in just a bit. Just maybe take a 10-minute break, and I'd like you to walk with me.
Yeah.
Because you know a lot about what we've done here.
Yeah.